Chapter 4, Saturday, 8:15 a.m. Reynolds woke up to a throbbing pain in his forehead. He lifted his head. The hand he had been resting on was covered in drool, and the spot where his head had been was red. His hand started tingling as oxygenated blood began to circulate again. Jeffrey noticed that the pain in his testicles had slightly eased. Then he saw the gun on the desk in front of him. He picked it up and slid it into his pocket. It was unlikely that anyone would come to the office, especially on a Saturday, but it was better to be cautious. Reynolds glanced at the clock on the wall. It showed 8:15. Today, he would need to go on a small reconnaissance mission. Jeffrey picked up a picture frame from the desk. The photo showed his twin daughters in identical outfits with red ribbons in their hair. The picture had been taken on a summer vacation when everything was still fine. It had been just a domestic trip, but the cabin was luxurious for the price they paid. There had been something shady about the Estonian-accented landlord, but the low price had silenced further questions. This year, the girls would get a proper gift. Maybe he would buy them a trip abroad to some warm southern destination. This time, however, both parents wouldn't be going. But first, he had to complete the job successfully. Reynolds grabbed another couple of ibuprofen and went to the bathroom. He washed the tablets down by drinking straight from the tap. A tired-looking man stared back at him from the mirror. The bruise in the corner of his eye was covered by a thick scab, and his eyelid was slightly darkened. At the police station, Anderson was waiting by the gigantic central printer, eager to get the printout in his hands. When the printer finally finished, it spat the paper onto the floor, and Anderson had to squat down to pick it up. He gave the misbehaving copier a sharp kick. Immediately after kicking it, Anderson looked around worriedly. Did anyone notice the abuse? Nobody seemed to care. The night shift was ending, and many were ready for bed. Although it was now morning, Anderson wasn't tired. He had fueled himself with energy drinks throughout the night. Now he headed towards Hasselhoff's desk. Hasselhoff was sprawled on his chair, legs on the desk, head tilted back, and a polite snore emanating from his open mouth. Anderson slammed the paper onto the desk. Found it. Hasselhoff nearly fell out of his chair but managed to regain his balance. "Don't scare me like that, for Christ's sake," Hasselhoff snapped. "Found it," Anderson repeated, tapping the paper with his forefinger. "There's only one white Ford Sierra listed. Model year 87. Owner Jeffrey Owen Reynolds. No significant prior run-ins with the police." Anderson paused. "So, this Steve Hill is a made-up name. Let's go check out what this Reynolds is all about." Hasselhoff glanced at the clock. "What if we just get the hell out of here? Our shift is almost over." "We've got half an hour left," Anderson insisted. Hasselhoff looked towards Anderson's desk. Should have guessed. There were 4 opened energy drink cans on the desk. "Oh, you're hopped up again. Fine. Let's go take a look." 20 minutes later, a police car pulled up in front of a townhouse. The address was Reynolds's. Anderson scanned the parked cars like a Doberman pumped full of amphetamines. No sign of a Sierra. "Nope, no Sierra," Hasselhoff said warily. "All right, let's just get this over with." The police went to Reynolds' door and knocked. No answer. Anderson knocked again and shouted, "Police, open up." No response from inside. Then a nasal voice called out from somewhere behind them, "He's not home." The police turned around. "Who was that?" Hasselhoff asked Anderson. There was no one in sight. "He didn't come home last night," the voice came again. It was coming from the ventilation window of the adjacent apartment. A broad face wedged between the window frame and the mosquito netting was visible. The neighborhood snoop was sharing information. The police headed towards the informant's apartment. Hasselhoff pulled out a card with his cell number from his pocket. He placed the card on the white painted windowsill in front of the snoop. "Call if Reynolds comes back." "What did he do?" the snoop inquired. "None of your business. And stop spying on your neighbors, except of course if it's Reynolds. Then you call us immediately. But if we catch you spying on your neighbors, we'll take you downtown. Understand? Good night," Hasselhoff said, heading towards the car. The snoop looked confused. Anderson tapped the card on the windowsill meaningfully and said, "Call." Then he, too, headed towards the car. Reynolds started the Sierra parked in the company's yard. He needed to do a reconnaissance trip for the final leg of the job. On the way, he took a detour to Pub Drunk Yard, as he was hungry, and William Foster had also made a visit to a fast food place. Pub Drunk Yard served food in addition to beer. The portions might not have been sophisticated or healthy, but they didn't skimp on frying fat or fillings. Legend had it that the food had been fried in the same oil since the 80s. The cashier, who looked like a dirty Mexican, eyed Reynolds' battered face and limping gait suspiciously, but didn't ask questions, just loaded a Diet Coke, large fries, and a double egg burger into a paper bag. Steve had called it a fag burger. Of course, it had 2 eggs in it. In hindsight, Steve's conversations were surprisingly often filled with mentions of gays. Reynolds pondered as he grabbed another handful of salt packets from the rack. He tossed the salts into the bag with the food. Jeffrey devoured his meal while driving. Eating while driving wasn't prohibited yet, after all. The cardboard container of fries lay open on the passenger seat. The hamburger was challenging, and a significant amount of pickle relish ended up in his lap. It didn't bother him since the relish blended well with the fabric. Reynolds drove toward the bus station. He parked the Sierra in the farthest corner of the area reserved for buses and walked across the lot to the bus terminal. Inside, people swarmed about. Nearly all the seats were occupied. Many were dragging suitcases behind them. The train station was across the street, sending waves of additional travelers. Jeffrey remembered the gun in his pocket. Suddenly, possessing it made him feel uneasy. He pushed it deeper, but now its tip was distinctly visible against the green fabric of his coat. Reynolds noticed the storage lockers. He went to the lockers, chose the first available one, and quickly slipped the gun inside. The gun clattered against the metal bottom. Jeffrey shut the door, glancing around. No one had paid attention to him. Now he stared at the door. There was no key, just a small single-line display and 12 keys. Instructions were next to the lock. Insert money, choose a 6-digit code, and press OK. Reynolds dug coins out of his pocket. A day cost €4. Jeffrey fed the machine 6. That should suffice. What number sequence to choose? He thought for a moment and decided on today's date. Jeffrey punched in the numbers and pressed OK. The lock clicked. Reynolds sighed, relieved that the gun was secured. Next, he headed to the kiosk's newspaper stand and bought a local paper. He found a free spot on a row of benches and settled in to read the paper. To his left sat a woman with 2 restless children, and to his right, an old man leaned on his cane. Reynolds scanned the security camera locations from behind his newspaper. There were at least 2 on the bus station side. The target was directly ahead. It was a bank. It could be accessed from the street and directly from the bus terminal. The bank would certainly have even more security cameras. They would be impossible to avoid. His face would most likely end up on video. Jeffrey considered painting his face black, but that would probably be a worse crime than a bank robbery nowadays. Reynolds' thoughts were interrupted when a guard exited the doors leading from the bank to the terminal. A short man who looked unnecessarily serious. Jeffrey glanced at the clock. Almost 11. He discreetly watched the guard's movements from behind his newspaper. The guard loitered near the doors for a moment, then exited to the street. There would be no need to enter the bank. The building was familiar from the days when bills were still paid at a payment terminal. From the days before online banking. However, the guard had given him something to think about. A new plan was brewing in Reynolds' mind, but it needed further consideration. Jeffrey checked the bank's door for opening hours and was surprised to see it was also open on Sundays, though only for a few hours. Something would be seriously wrong if the robbery took more than a few minutes. Reynolds stood up and threw the newspaper into the nearest trash can. He left the bus station and headed to the train station across the street. Upon reaching the station, Jeffrey went straight to the ticket counter, even though there were free machines available. He wanted to ensure his visit was remembered. A middle-aged woman with a tired look and curly hair was chewing gum behind the glass partition. Her name tag read Karen. 1 ticket to Rovaniemi for tomorrow. The woman fiddled with the computer. First and last departure at 11:55. Under what name? Karen asked without looking up from the screen. Jeffrey noticed she didn't wear a ring on her left ring finger. Jeffrey Reynolds, but you can call me Jeff, Reynolds quipped, though he realized he looked even less attractive than usual. There was a large gash at the corner of his eye, and the bruise had darkened even more. By the way, when do you get off work? Maybe we could go for coffee. Reynolds continued. He wanted to ensure the woman remembered his visit. The woman stared at Jeffrey for a moment, then started typing something, and the ticket began printing. Karen announced the price, and Jeffrey pulled out his payment card. Transaction declined, the payment terminal indicated. Reynolds realized he had emptied his account. Can you charge €10 to the card, and I'll pay the rest in cash? He wanted a record of the payment in the system. The arrangement was fine with Karen, and Jeffrey got his ticket. Reynolds left the ticket counter and walked toward the nearest trash can. He had no intention of going to Rovaniemi. He had bought the ticket as a decoy in case someone got on his trail. Just as he was about to throw the ticket away, he noticed writing on the edge. There was a phone number written in blue ballpoint pen. Damn, the woman was interested in going on a date after all. Probably no one had asked her out, given how perpetually annoyed she looked. A smile appeared on Jeffrey's face, and he felt a quick sting in the bruised corner of his eye. His groin still hurt when he walked, but Reynolds decided to keep the ticket. No need to rush into bed on the first date. For once, he could play hard to get. Next, Jeffrey decided to look up information about the security company. The station had a booth with a computer for public use. It probably saw little use now that everyone had smartphones in their pockets. Reynolds went to the abandoned computer. It seemed the cleaner had abandoned it as well, as the screen was covered in fingerprints and smudges. The mouse and built-in keyboard looked equally disgusting, so Jeffrey pulled his sleeves over his fingers before starting to type. This time, the State Railway's homepage was up. He typed Google into the address bar again, and then the name of the security company he had read on the cap of the guard who had been at the bank, followed by the city name. The search results immediately showed a map and the address of the security company's office. Reynolds had seen enough. He closed the browser and headed back toward the bus terminal. Jeffrey hopped onto the bus and paid in cash. He got off at the stop closest to his apartment. Though the walk wasn't long, his sore ankle made the journey feel excruciatingly slow. At home, he packed a change of clothes and his earlier disguise into a green gym bag. He also added the Falling Down DVD. There wasn't much worth taking. After the heist, returning home might not be an option. He left the bag by the door. Reynolds checked the fridge. For a snack, he chose some expired buttermilk and half a sausage. He slathered the sausage with a stripe of mustard along its entire length. Jeffrey ate, staring blankly ahead, his mind racing. Had he considered everything? After eating, Jeffrey showered and shaved. He needed to look as clean-cut as possible for the bank tomorrow. His eye was bruised and his eyebrow scabbed, but there was nothing to be done about that now. If I see that junkie again, he'll get what's coming to him, Reynolds muttered to himself. At 8, Jeffrey slung the bag over his shoulder and left his apartment. He decided to walk to the company. Just a few hundred yards in, he realized he should have worn different shoes. He'd chosen combat boots, thinking they'd support his sprained ankle better, but the left boot pinched his toes, and the right one flapped with each step due to a loose sole. He pressed on determinedly. It took about an hour, using shortcuts, to reach the destination. He avoided the motorcycle garage to steer clear of further trouble. When he was a few hundred yards from the company, Reynolds suddenly stopped. He had spotted a police car parked near his workplace. Jeffrey dove into the nearest roadside bush, peering out from its cover. 2 police officers were inspecting his truck. One approached the building and tried to look inside. A waste of time, Jeffrey knew. The window was dirty, and there were no lights on inside. Reynolds crouched behind the bush, heart racing. How could they be onto me? I haven't done anything illegal yet. Then Jeffrey thought perhaps the police were looking for witnesses to the previous night's events. Just leave, he wished. After a few minutes, the officers returned to their car and drove off. The police car headed toward him, prompting Reynolds to burrow deeper into the bush. His camouflage outfit was again proving useful. The car passed by. Jeffrey waited until it was completely out of sight. The car stopped, stayed put for a moment, then reversed. Reynolds wedged himself even deeper into the bush. Had they seen him? The car kept coming but then turned left and drove away. They had taken a wrong turn. Reynolds sighed with relief. He waited a bit longer, then emerged from the bush and continued to the office. Inside, he only turned on the bathroom light, leaving the door open. He changed from his camouflage outfit into sweatpants and a flannel shirt, less conspicuous for the morning. Jeffrey set his phone alarm for 5:30 a.m., making sure the volume was high. Sleeping in the chair was unappealing, but he didn't want to sleep in the truck in case the police returned. Reynolds searched the drawers and cabinets thoroughly, but found no more alcohol. Then he remembered something. He went to the bathroom and lifted the toilet tank lid. Floating in the tank water was a bottle. Jeffrey rolled up his sleeve and retrieved it. The label was long gone, washed away, but the bottle was embossed with Koskin Korva. It seemed designed for such clandestine storage. Reynolds dried the bottle with a towel and happily returned to his desk. He sat down, twisted the cap off, and heard the familiar crack. This time the cap stayed on the table, not tossed into the corner as the previous night. The bottle would be his travel companion. Tonight, just a few sips to calm the nerves, Reynolds thought as he poured a small amount into a thick-bottomed whiskey glass. He lit a cigarette and leaned back in his chair, glass in one hand. If this doesn't work, he left the thought unfinished. He began reviewing the plan for tomorrow. At dawn, before 6, he would park the truck across the road in front of the security company's office, blocking the path of the guard starting his round. He would ask the guard to check under the hood and then knock him out, possibly hitting him on the head with the hood. He would take the guard's uniform, lock the guard in the truck, and drive the guard's car to the bank. He would retrieve the gun from the bus terminal locker and wait for the right moment. In the bank, he would request to speak with the manager under some security pretext. No one would suspect anything, since he would be dressed as a guard. He would threaten the manager with the gun, who would then help him access the vault and the cash. He would lock the manager in the vault, leave calmly and inconspicuously, and drive to the Sierra, waiting at the bus station parking lot. Jeffrey considered the plan foolproof and wondered why no one else had thought of it. Reynolds finished his glass and poured another. The vodka dulled the tension and the various aches in his body. With half the bottle left, Jeffrey passed out, head resting on the table. Hasselhoff and Anderson cruised around the city in their blue and white Mondeo, searching for Reynolds without success at his apartment and workplace. Now they kept an eye out for a white Sierra. Anderson's stomach growled. "Are you hungry? Should we get some dunner?" Hasselhoff suggested. "No way. I haven't dared touch kebab since that Swedish donor diarrhea case. Let's go to a gas station for coffee and some pastries," Anderson countered. "That gut of yours needs fixing," Hasselhoff said, pointing at Anderson's stomach. He took a new route, turning right at the next intersection. "Stop, stop," Anderson exclaimed. Hasselhoff glanced in the rearview mirror and slammed on the brakes. The Mondeo halted abruptly on the dry asphalt. "What now?" Anderson gasped for breath and loosened the seatbelt. "That was a bit much." "You told me to stop." "Yeah, but keep some sense in it. Look over there," Anderson said, pointing to the far left while rubbing his chest with one hand. Hasselhoff stared for a moment before seeing what had caught Anderson's attention. In the far corner of the bus station parking lot was a white Ford Sierra with a large rear spoiler. "Let's go check it out. Looks like we've caught Jeffrey Reynolds," Hasselhoff said. Chapter 5. Sunday, Reynolds woke up in pain. He cracked open his crusty eyes and lifted his head from the sticky surface of the table. As his vision cleared, he saw that the table was covered in blood. The wound in the corner of his eye had reopened while he slept, leaving the table smeared with blood. Jeffrey felt the injured corner of his eye. The sting jolted him fully awake. He looked at the wall clock. Damn it, it was almost 10. Why hadn't the damn alarm gone off? Reynolds fiddled with his phone and checked the alarm settings. Only now did he notice that the alarm was set for Monday through Friday. No alarm on Sunday. No damn alarm on Sunday. Jeffrey's muttering turned into a roar. He hurled the phone at the brick wall between the clock and the bulletin board. There was a crunch as the phone's screen shattered. Smartphone, my ass. Sold me a goddamn idiot phone, those damn telemarketers. Reynolds cursed as he rushed to the bathroom to wash his bloody face. He carefully cleaned the wound with water and pressed a piece of paper against it. It hurt, but Jeffrey didn't have time to care. Maybe the guard's shift started later, and he could still carry out his plan. Reynolds threw the Koskin Korva into his bag, zipped it shut, and dashed out, limping. He left the door unlocked, but there wasn't anything worth stealing inside anyway, now that the last bottle of booze was in his bag. He climbed into the truck as quickly as his battered body allowed. Jeffrey fumbled with the key in the ignition, which of course resisted in his haste. When the key finally slid in, he started the engine. It roared to life without issue, and Jeffrey hurriedly took off. The tires would have squealed if the truck hadn't been so old and worn out. Instead, it lurched forward, almost stalling again. He pressed the clutch and increased the revs. The truck jerked forward until it gained enough momentum to smooth out the ride. The shortest route to the security firm's office was through the motorcycle garage. As he passed the garage, Jeffrey saw no signs of life, but there were still motorcycles parked outside. Apparently, the partying had continued on Saturday. Reynolds noticed that the trash bin he had moved next to the chain-link fence was still in place. He refocused on the road and saw someone shuffling along the shoulder. Then Jeffrey recognized something familiar. He identified the black t-shirt with a large pink hand giving the middle finger on the back. It's that damn junkie. You're lucky I don't have a weapon now, Jeffrey muttered through gritted teeth and pressed the gas pedal to the floor. Both the truck and Reynolds' RPMs began to rise. He aimed the truck's front at the junkie. The intention wasn't to run him over, just to scare him a bit. The junkie reacted to the approaching noise too late. Jeffrey's deliberate or accidental misjudgment of the distance resulted in the truck's right side mirror slamming into the back of the junkie's head. To Reynolds' immense delight, the junkie flew face first into the uncut roadside vegetation. "Nobody kicks me without consequences, you damn speed whore," Reynolds screamed and laughed maniacally. After calming down, Jeffrey tried to see how badly the assailant was hurt, but the side mirror had turned towards the truck's side, and Jeffrey saw only his maniacal grin in it. He felt like stopping the truck by the roadside and kicking the junkie in the balls. Damn it, a free vasectomy on me. Unfortunately, there was another urgent matter. Kick the junkie's balls or knock an innocent guard unconscious. Welcome to the world of choices. The junkie's balls would have to wait. It was good to have future plans, and the guard couldn't be so innocent as not to deserve a little headache. Jeffrey continued his journey. He was in a better mood after getting some retribution and turned on the radio. Motley Crue was just finishing the song "Kickstart My Heart," and the voices of rock radio hosts Roxy Blaze and Axel Thunder filled the air. The broadcast was a rerun from the week, and Jeffrey couldn't concentrate on what he was hearing. As he approached the security firm's office, Reynolds slowed down to 40. The building was black and white, and the cobblestones surrounding the yard were lined with rows of thuja trees. There were no company-branded cars in sight. As he feared, all the guards had already left for their rounds. Jeffrey had missed his chance. He parked the truck at the end of the driveway and leaned against the steering wheel. Reynolds stared at the building, contemplating his next move. Finally, he decided to go through with the robbery the old-fashioned way, with guns blazing. Yeah, no backing down now, Reynolds said, checking the dashboard clock. It was 20 past 10. If the guard was on schedule, he would leave the bank a little before 11. There was no point in rushing to the bank before the guard finished his round. Jeffrey turned the truck expertly at the end of the driveway and headed towards the center of town. The speedometer showed a little over 80 when a hunting dog ran onto the road from behind a bend. Reynolds stomped on the brakes and swerved to the right. The truck slid deep into the ditch. The dog, however, trotted into the woods on the left side of the road, completely unscathed. God damn it! Reynolds cursed and pounded the steering wheel with both hands. Now he was stuck in the ditch. The world seemed to have positioned itself between him and the bank robbery. As if it mattered to the world in the slightest, Jeffrey cursed. The truck was severely tilted to the right, and Reynolds craned his neck to see out the window how deep into the ditch he had ended up. He shifted into reverse and slowly lifted the clutch, but the wheels just spun uselessly. Reynolds noticed movement in the side mirror. A car approaching from behind stopped at the roadside behind the truck. Jeffrey kept staring at the mirror. The car looked familiar. It was an old black Chevrolet Impala. Reynolds couldn't recall where he recognized the car from. The man who got out of the Impala started walking towards the truck. Jeffrey tried to think. He had a vague feeling that something was wrong besides his truck being in a ditch and the bank still unrobbed. The man reached the truck cab and opened the door. "Did you get hurt?" "Yeah, just a bit." "Hey, wait a minute, your claws with the acid." "Damn it!" Reynolds shouted excitedly. The man was startled and ran away. Now Jeffrey remembered where he had seen the black Impala and its crew before. Some time ago, the same men had followed his truck. They had called his cell and asked him to stop, claiming they wanted to buy beer directly from the load. The caller had introduced himself as Klaus from the classic. Reynolds had heard it as Claus with the acid. He had been suspicious of the men's intentions and had refused to stop. Back then, the men following him had overtaken his truck and parked theirs in the middle of the road, forcing him to stop. After narrowly avoiding a collision, Jeffrey had angrily gone to inquire what the hell they were doing. Then the driver, dressed only in a towel, had knocked him unconscious. Finally, the hooligans had stolen beer and sausage from the truck. Reynolds started after Claus. They damn well owed him help getting the truck out of the ditch after what they did last time. "Holy shit, that's Reynolds!" The towel man who had gotten out of the car shouted. Jeffrey stopped, but didn't have time to dodge the man's left hook. It hit his jaw and dropped the already bloodied and battered truck driver to the ground. "That'll teach you," the man said, lighting a cigarette. Reynolds lay on the ground, his consciousness somewhere far, far away. A funeral director and two other men stepped out of the car. "Well, do we have a customer here?" The funeral director asked excitedly. "Unfortunately not. He just lost consciousness. We've run into each other before. Or rather, he's run into my fist. Last time, he had a truck full of beer and sausages. Let's see what he's carrying today," said the towel man, walking towards the back of the truck. He unlocked the latches, opened the truck's cargo door slightly, and peeked inside. The towel man turned around. "How much does a tow service cost these days?" "Probably around 200, guessed the funeral director. The truck's cargo revealed crates of beer and several boxes of grill sausages. "Okay, throw Reynolds into the cab. Klaus will drive the truck, and the rest of you go to the front to push it out." The towel man commanded and went to get a tow rope from his car. He attached the rope between the Impala and the truck. The limp Reynolds, however, was more challenging. It took 4 men to drag and push the unconscious Jeffrey into the footwell of the cab. Klaus sat in the driver's seat and kicked Reynolds' legs away from the pedals. Then he started the truck and shoved it into reverse. The gearbox made a noise resembling a duck's quack. The other men moved to the front of the truck and took their positions to push it out of the ditch. "Now it goes," the towel man shouted and carefully reversed to tighten the rope. The tires spun and he eased off the gas. Klaus's timing was off. There was some cursing and a retry. Pulling again, the truck slowly started moving. The pushers scrambled and stumbled in the overgrown vegetation of the ditch's edge. When the truck's tires got a good grip on the asphalt, it jerked back sharply, and in a moment, the pushers were sprawled on the roadside. When the truck was back in its lane, Reynolds was moved to the driver's seat with his face against the steering wheel. The men took off Reynolds's flannel shirt. They put it back on backwards and buttoned it up the back. The artwork was completed by drawing an eye patch on Reynolds with a black marker. They left the truck running. Reynolds would have something to wonder about when he woke up. The men laughed. In the middle of the lane, shirt backwards and an eye patch on his face. As a reward for the towing service, the men took a couple of crates of beer and a few packs of sausages from the back of the truck. It was almost 11:30 when Jeffrey regained consciousness. His head ached, and his jaw felt as if it were about half an inch too far to the left. Jeffrey rubbed his jaw and tried to fit his lower teeth to his upper teeth. He wondered what had happened. The truck was in the middle of the lane, and the engine was running. What the hell had indeed happened? His mind was blank. He looked around, hoping to find some clue about what had transpired. His shoulders were tight. Jeffrey looked down and noticed that his shirt was backwards. The buttons were on the back. What the hell? Reynolds tried to unbutton it, but it was hopeless. He started to pull the shirt over his head. After some struggling, he managed to get the shirt off. Jeffrey looked in the mirror and noticed that someone had drawn a pirate eye patch around his eye with a black marker. What the hell? He tried to scrub his face, but the marker wouldn't come off. Jeffrey found a bottle of vodka in his bag. He poured some onto the sleeve of his flannel shirt and started scrubbing his face clean of the marker. While Reynolds was scrubbing, a hunting dog burst out of the bushes. It dashed across the road without slowing down. Jeffrey's memory began to return. He had swerved to avoid that damn mutt and ended up in the ditch. And then those hooligans had shown up. And now he was back in his truck in the middle of the road. Had those drunkards actually towed him out of the ditch? It seemed likely. Reynolds looked out the window and saw that the grass on the roadside was trampled. Reynolds looked in the mirror, but the Impala and its crew had left. Probably a couple of crates of beer and a few packs of sausages were missing with the men, Jeffrey concluded, and continued cleaning his face. His eyes stung like hell, but the marker came off surprisingly well. Jeffrey started moving again. When he reached downtown, the vodka-reeking Reynolds parked the truck in an alley next to the train station. He turned on the hazard lights. The truck could stay there for a long time before anyone would be bothered by it. Jeffrey checked the dashboard clock. The guard would have already visited the bank if he had kept to his schedule. Reynolds turned off the engine. He took a blue cap and sunglasses from his bag and put them on. Jeffrey placed the vodka bottle in front of him. He examined it for a moment before taking a long, fortifying swig. The bottle went back into the bag, and Reynolds climbed out of the truck into the alley, bag slung over his shoulder. Jeffrey took a few steps forward and then stopped to survey his surroundings. People thronged both sides of the busy street. Jeffrey pulled the brim of his cap lower and headed towards the crosswalk and the bus terminal on the other side. Once inside, he headed straight for the storage lockers. Jeffrey raised his hand to punch in the number, but his mind went blank. The number combination had escaped him. Where there should have been a code, there was nothing but emptiness. The blow to his head must have damaged his memory. Reynolds tried the numbers from 1 to 6. Nothing happened. The lock didn't open. Next, he tried entering his own birth date. After pressing the OK button, the 6 stars disappeared from the display, but the locker remained locked. Reynolds scratched his head. He decided to try his daughter's birthdays. Again, he's punched in the numbers and pressed OK, but the result was the same. The locker refused to yield its contents. Jeffrey slammed his fist into the blue metal door of the locker. The loud bang drew some glances, but Jeffrey didn't care. His frustration was growing exponentially. He was about to try his ex-wife's birth date, but realized he didn't remember it. However, Jeffrey concluded that he probably hadn't remembered it even before the blow to his head. Reynolds turned and leaned against the locker, frustrated. Fucking hell. You can't rob a bank without a weapon. Jeffrey stared at the bank for a long moment. Finally, he turned his gaze toward the large windows facing the platforms. Reynolds spotted his Sierra in the far corner of the lot, but had to rub his eyes when he saw that there was a police car parked behind it, with officers walking around the Sierra. Jeffrey's heart skipped a beat and then began to race. Reynolds felt a surge of impending panic. One of the officers was trying unsuccessfully to open the Sierra's driver's door. The taller officer bent down and peered through the passenger side window. "What the hell are they doing over there?" Reynolds wondered, glancing back at the bank. Nothing was going according to plan. The guard was still at large, and the gun was locked away. He turned his attention back to the storage locker. What on earth was the code I set for this lock? Jeffrey worried. The staff would probably be able to open the locker, but they would hardly do so without knowing what was inside, and that certainly hadn't gone according to plan. Damn combination lock. What was wrong with the old keyed lockers? No weapon, no robbery. And even if there was a weapon, the police had the getaway vehicle surrounded. He looked back toward the Sierra. The officers were making their way toward the terminal, already halfway across the bus parking area. The taller officer, who walked with a peculiar bouncing gait, had almost been run over by a reversing bus, but the shorter officer managed to pull him to safety at the last moment. The shorter officer pointed at the taller one and grinned. Reynolds took one last glance at the storage locker and then headed toward the door leading to the street. How the hell could they be on my tail? Did I accidentally let slip something about my plans at the motorcycle garage? I was almost sober, Jeffrey wondered. Well, I'm not going to stick around to find out. And if I did say something, it's better if the police don't find me here, Jeffrey decided. Hurrying toward the truck waiting on the other side of the street, Reynolds noticed an old clock above the railway station entrance. It showed 10 minutes to 12. It reminded him of something, and Reynolds stopped. The Rovaniemi train would leave in 5 minutes. Jeffrey set the green gym bag down on the street and bent over it. He started rummaging through the bag and found a train ticket in the pocket of his camo pants, with Karen's phone number written on the edge. Karen would have to wait a bit longer for their date, Jeffrey thought as he slipped the ticket between his lips. He fumbled with the bag's zipper, which got stuck halfway and slipped from his fingers. Reynolds looked back. From the large windows of the bus station, he could see that the police had just arrived at the doors leading from the bus departure platforms to the terminal. Jeffrey yanked the zipper back and tried again. This time, the zipper closed without resistance. Reynolds grabbed the bag, slung it over his shoulder, and hurried toward the railway station, glancing back over his shoulder. The police were already at the storage lockers. They didn't stop at the lockers, but continued toward the terminal. Why would they stop? They couldn't know about the weapon. Jeffrey joined the crowd waiting at the crosswalk. Cars were streaming by, so walking against the light would have been, if not suicide, at least incredibly stupid. The red pedestrian signal stood there, and Jeffrey stared at it, trying to will it to change to the green man. The seconds seemed to drag. Reynolds no longer dared to look back. The police had to be right on his tail. He pushed his way through the crowd, receiving angry glares in return. Finally, the light changed, and Jeffrey started to cross the street, but something tugged at his hand from behind. What the hell? For a split second, Jeffrey considered abandoning the bag, but with almost half a bottle of booze and the falling down DVD inside, he tightened his grip on the strap. Would William Foster have given up the bag? Hell no. Reluctant to part with his booze, Reynolds turned to see what or who had grabbed the bag. It was wedged between two men. To Jeffrey's relief, they weren't police officers. They were two muscle-bound brutes whose muscles looked like they hadn't been built by just lifting weights and eating oatmeal. Their sleeveless shirts revealed biceps as thick as Stryker's thighs. Reynolds had squeezed between them while waiting for the light to change, and the long gym bag had ended up partly behind the men. The men protested his intrusion by closing the bag between them. "Sorry," Reynolds said. He loosened the strap and let the bag drop to the men's legs, allowing it to slip free. "Must have skipped leg day," he mumbled as he quickly moved away. He weaved through the other crosswalkers to get to the station as fast as possible. Besides the police being on his tail, the train would be leaving very soon. Jeffrey made it across the street and limped into the railway station. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 5 minutes to 11. 1 minute left. Reynolds glanced toward the ticket counter as he hurried through the station building. He couldn't see Karen. At the doors leading out to the platforms, he had to slow down and wait for an elderly couple struggling with a massive suitcase to get through. Jeffrey held the door open for them. He wanted to urge them along, but kept his mouth shut. Once the elderly couple made it out, Jeffrey stepped onto the platform. He scanned the signs showing destinations, times, and platforms. It was easy to find. The train to Rovaniemi was departing from Platform 1. Not that there were many other options. The clock next to the sign showed 5 minutes to the hour, but the Rovaniemi train was right in front of him. Thanks to the state railways for being consistently late. Limping toward the nearest car, Reynolds wondered how often people barely made their train simply because train was even more late than the passengers. Delays in connecting services were a whole different story. Jeffrey pressed the button on the side of the train car. After a moment's pause, the door began to open. Reynolds lifted his left foot onto the step and pulled himself up, using the handle on the side of the door for support. A sharp pain shot through his side, and his chest muscles tensed. He was short of breath. Jeffrey grimaced in pain, standing still and still holding on to the handle. The door made a hissing sound as it closed behind him. The pressure in his chest eased slightly, and Jeffrey was able to get a little air. He cautiously turned his head and looked out through the window in the door. He couldn't see any police, at least not yet. Reynolds tried to breathe deeply, but the tight feeling in his chest only worsened. He walked carefully toward the compartment. The seats in the car and the door separating the vestibule were closed. Reynolds pressed the button to open the intermediate door. This door also took a brief pause before sliding open. The carriage revealed behind the door was packed to the brim. People were still in the aisle, lifting bags onto the overhead racks and hanging up their coats. The carriage was filled with the buzz of conversation, some excited, some whispering. Jeffrey started to move forward, dodging other passengers. He decided to take the first available seat he found. He could look for his own carriage and seat later. Nervous, Jeffrey was startled when a child started crying in the row next to him. He noticed an ice cream cone on the floor, pointy end up. A kind of catastrophe at that age, Jeffrey knew. He continued forward, trying to glance at the platform through the carriage windows. He wasn't sure, but he thought he saw police officers at the doors leading to the platform. There were enough passengers in front of him to block his view of the doors. Jeffrey had to stop. Someone a bit too short for the task was trying to lift their suitcase onto the overhead rack. Jeffrey could have helped, but didn't, as his chest was still tight. After half a minute of reaching and grunting, the short person managed to get the suitcase onto the rack and moved out of the way. Jeffrey continued onward. It seemed he would have to look for a seat in the next carriage. However, he found an available aisle seat in the last row. In the window seat sat a pointy-bearded man in an all-green outfit, looking quite foolish. For some reason, Jeffrey felt the man must be a wilderness guide. He sat in the free seat and impatiently waited for the train to start moving before the police got on. Jeffrey peered at the platform, but saw no sign of the police, only passengers' companions, some waving, some already walking away. The wilderness guide next to him smelled of sweat and peat, and Jeffrey pulled away. Were the police already on the train? When the train had been traveling for half an hour without any sign of the police, Jeffrey checked his ticket for his carriage and seat number. Now he sat in his own seat in a half-empty carriage. On the fold-out tray from the seat back in front of him were a hot coffee and a cinnamon roll. Jeffrey reflected on the events of the past few days. He had almost robbed a bank. Damn, he would have done it if he hadn't forgotten the code for the storage locker. He touched the side of his head, feeling a bump. Jeffrey wondered how he got it. Probably hit my head on the asphalt when that strange towel-clad guy knocked me out. Why the hell is he walking around in just a towel? Jeffrey continued pondering. The bank had gone unrobbed because some hooligans wanted to steal beer. Damn it. On the other hand, the truck might still be in the ditch if those same hooligans hadn't towed it back to the road. But why were the police on his tail? While thinking about this, Jeffrey removed the plastic lid from his coffee, took a bottle of Koskenkorva vodka from his bag, and poured some into the coffee. Jeffrey was no longer afraid that the police might be on the train. They would have had plenty of time to find him, but no one had shown up. He hadn't even tried to hide. He could have locked himself in the bathroom and stayed there for the entire trip. The thought had crossed his mind, but spending many hours in a metal box reeking of urine was unappealing. The only conversation he had was with the conductor, who thought he recognized the phone number written on the edge of Jeffrey's ticket. Jeffrey decided to ask Karen if she often wrote her phone number on train tickets. The train began to slow down. Moments earlier, an announcement had said the next stop was Ulu. The train crawled at a snail's pace for a long time before arriving at the station. When the train stopped, Jeffrey stood up and slung his green gym bag over his shoulder. He had a few minutes before the train continued its journey. He had set out without a detailed plan. He had no idea where he would stay the night and refused to spend his money on a hotel. A hostel might be an option, but not until all other alternatives were exhausted. He didn't want to go home because there might be police waiting with questions he didn't want to answer. He needed to let the situation calm down a bit. Jeffrey stepped cautiously onto the station platform and lit a cigarette. He took a few long drags and started limping towards the old light yellow station building. By the time he reached the steps leading to the door, he had already smoked half of his cigarette. After climbing the rest of the steps, Jeffrey took a final drag and tossed the butt on the ground. He stepped inside and began looking for a public phone. His own phone lay dead on the floor of the company's office after failing to wake him up. Surprisingly, there were quite a few people milling around the station. Must be a busload of Asian tourists. Jeffrey started weaving through the crowd. He found a public phone near the back wall. Contrary to his expectations, it was occupied. A short man, seemingly of Asian descent, was hanging onto the receiver. Reynolds walked closer and waited for his turn. He looked at the large clock on the wall. There was no time to waste. The train would leave soon. The man in front of him was chattering away in his native language. Jeffrey cleared his throat loudly, but the man on the phone didn't react. Well, damn, doesn't anyone get a hint anymore? Reynolds thought. Hey, get the hell off the phone. I'm in a bit of a hurry, Jeffrey urged. Now Jackie Chan's look-alike turned and looked surprised. Thanks, Jeffrey said and grabbed the phone from the man's hand. He put the receiver to his ear and said, "He'll call you back." Then Reynolds ended the call. He dug out all the remaining coins from his wallet and fed them into the machine. Then he dialed the number for directory assistance that he had memorized. The call was answered on the second beep. "Directory assistance, Shirley speaking. How can I help you?" came a cheerful female voice. "Reynolds here. Can you find me Steve Hill's address in Rovaniemi?" One moment. A few seconds passed as the woman searched for the address. Then there was a kind of startled chuckle on the other end. "Yes, there are 2 matches." "Go ahead." "Okay. The first address is 770 Bendick Road." Jeffrey laughed out loud at the street name. "Yeah, no need to tell me the other one. That's the one. Thanks a lot." Reynolds hung up the phone and turned around. So he moved to Bendick. Should have guessed. Jeffrey noticed the Asian man was coming towards him with a determined stride. His expression didn't bode well. The man had brought an employee from the station with him, who was following and trying to get the Asian man to stop. Reynolds thought it best to leave before he got a karate kick to the head. He tightened his grip on his bag's strap and hobbled towards the train as quickly as he could. The train started moving before Jeffrey managed to get back to his seat. The sudden start threw Reynolds off balance, and a quick step forward sent a jolt of pain through his sprained ankle. "Damn it," Jeffrey grumbled in pain and continued more slowly and cautiously. When he finally reached his seat, Reynolds pulled a beige trench coat, his flasher's cloak, from his bag and put it on. He was cold. Could he be running a fever? Reynolds wondered. His body had been through a lot lately. He felt his forehead. It felt warm, but his hands were cold, so he shoved them into his pockets to warm them. There was something in the right pocket. Jeffrey pulled out some scraps, price tags, and product labels he had torn off the clothes he bought for his disguise. He shoved the trash into the designated bag hanging from the wall. Something was nagging at him. Reynolds stared at the bulging trash bag for a few seconds and bent down again. His ribs ached, and Jeffrey had to hold his breath. He lowered the edge of the bag. Among the trash, he saw the familiar logo of a scratch-off ticket. Jeffrey fished out the ticket and painfully straightened up. He stared at the ticket and remembered buying it along with the coat and cap from Budget Mart. Reynolds dug into his wallet but realized that the coin section was empty. The last coins went into the public phone a moment ago. Across the aisle sat a woman in her 50s whose enormous breasts rested like oven mitts on her huge belly. The woman was knitting a wool sock, her hands barely reaching each other. Good grief. Jeffrey swallowed. Dare he ask her for a coin to borrow? Reynolds decided to try. He cleared his throat and immediately thought the throat clearing wouldn't work again, but the woman turned her gaze to him at once. She looked inquisitive. Do you have a coin I could borrow for a moment so I can scratch this? Jeffrey waved the scratch-off ticket in front of him. The woman set the half-finished sock and needles on her oven mitts and reached for her purse on the adjacent seat. She fumbled through her bag until she found her wallet. All her movements seemed extremely laborious. The woman scrutinized Reynolds' battered appearance appraisingly and then began to dig through her wallet. She shifted the coins with her index finger and, not finding a smaller one, handed Jeffrey a 20-cent coin. "I want that back," the woman said in a stern tone. "Of course," Reynolds said and added silently to himself, "I wouldn't be able to pay for this with sex anyway. A 10-cent would have been manageable. Maybe even 15, but not 20. A smile appeared on Jeffrey's face. He thanked the woman and tried to wink, but regretted it instantly when his bruised eye reminded him of its presence. Jeffrey twirled the coin a few times in his fingers, hesitating, but then started scratching. The first game was tic-tac-toe, where he needed to get 3 in a row, vertically, horizontally, or diagonally. He didn't win that one, so Jeffrey moved on to the second game, which had the chance to win the grand prize. He started scratching. The first row revealed 2 10s and 1 5. The second row revealed the first 100,000. Jeffrey continued scratching more feverishly. The first of the bottom row was also 100,000. No way. He just needed one more. The middle spot revealed a 5. Jeffrey stopped scratching. It all hinged on the last number. He carefully scraped the surface. A 1 appeared. No way, this is close. He continued scratching, and the rest of the zeros of the 100,000 were revealed. Reynolds stared at the ticket. It couldn't be true. The ticket had been in his pocket all along, and there it was. The grand prize of 100,000 euros. The girls would indeed get decent birthday presents, and there would be some left for himself, too. Jeffrey cleared his throat and handed the 20-cent coin back to the oven mitts woman. She took the coin and asked curiously, "How much did you win?" "Enough," Reynolds answered vaguely. This called for a bit of celebration. He opened the plastic lid of his coffee again and poured the rest of the vodka into the paper cup. Damn. 100,000. Epilogue. Several hours later, Reynolds was sitting in Steve's cabin kitchen. He had asked a question and was waiting for an answer. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. Steve placed a crate of beer on the table. "Of course, I have a DVD player. Why do you ask?" We could watch a movie, Reynolds said. He pulled the film falling down from his bag and tossed it onto the table. Steve picked up the movie and examined the case. How about we watch some porn? I have a large collection, Steve suggested. I know you have. I don't doubt that at all, but let's watch this first. I'll tell you everything that's happened afterward. This is the end of H. Ruta's book, Falling Down North.